In the quiet, dusty corners of the hogshead, where the dim light barely penetrated and the patrons were few, there existed a peculiar mirror. It was no larger than an ordinary looking glass, its frame tarnished silver, and its surface clouded with age. Yet it possessed a property that set it apart from any other magical artifact in existence. It could show not just reflections, but glimpses into the past and future. Elderly Tom, the bartender who had seen more winters than he cared to count, kept this secret close. He would occasionally use the mirror's power to watch his younger self playing with friends under the sun outside Hogsmeade, or to glimpse the hogshead of old, bustling with life and laughter, but he never let anyone else know about its existence. One evening, as Tom was wiping down the bar, a young man entered the inn. He was tall, with shaggy black hair falling into his eyes, and an air of nervousness about him that made his wand hand twitch reflexively whenever someone looked at him. Tom knew immediately who he was, Sirius Black, the escaped convict falsely accused of killing 13 people with a single curse. Tom hesitated, then poured Sirius a pint of butterbeer. "On the house," he said gruffly, pushing it across the counter. Sirius nodded gratefully, took a sip, and began to chat nervously about anything but his own situation. As they talked, Tom felt a prickling sensation at the back of his neck. He turned just as Peter Pettigrew, Sirius's former friend, and now known as Wormtail, slipped into the inn unnoticed. The rat-like man cast a furtive glance around before slinking towards their table. "Sirius," he hissed, sliding into a seat opposite him, "I've found something extraordinary." Sirius raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Tom watched curiously as Peter reached into his pocket and pulled out the mirror. "It shows you your past, Sirius," Peter whispered excitedly. "I saw myself when I was 10 years old, playing in Diagon Alley with my brothers." He trailed off, noticing Tom's stare. "It's just a trinket," he muttered defensively. Tom shrugged, turning away to polish a glass, but his curiosity was piqued. That night, after closing the hogshead and ensuring no prying eyes lingered nearby, he took out the mirror and gazed into its depths. At first all Tom saw was his own reflection, an old man with lines etched deep into his face, silver hair dishevelled from years behind a bar. Then slowly the image began to shift. He watched himself as a young boy, playing outside Hogshead with his friends, laughing and shouting while they chased each other around the village green. It was bittersweet, seeing those carefree days again. As Tom continued watching, he noticed something peculiar. Every time he blinked or looked away from the mirror, the scene changed slightly. When he looked back, he saw himself not as a boy, but as a young man, standing beside his wife at their wedding ceremony. Another blink, another shift. Now he was cradling their newborn daughter in his arms, smiling down at her with love and pride. Realizing what was happening, Tom felt a chill run through him. The mirror wasn't just showing him memories, it was allowing him to experience time itself, fluid and changeable as water. Over the next few weeks, Tom became obsessed with the mirror. He would spend hours each night watching his life unfold before him like a movie reel, losing track of time until his eyes grew heavy and the mirror slipped from his grasp. He saw his daughter grow up, watched her marry and have children of her own. He witnessed wars fought and won, governments rise and fall, all played out across generations in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, Sirius remained hidden in Hogshead, biding his time until he could clear his name. Peter continued to visit them both, though he seemed less eager to speak about the mirror. Tom noticed dark circles under his eyes, and sometimes caught him staring vacantly into space, murmuring to himself as if engaged in some inner conversation. One evening, while Tom was cleaning behind the bar, he discovered something tucked away among the cobwebs, a small pile of rat bones. He picked them up, turning them over in his hands, feeling an unpleasant chill run down his spine. There was no doubt in his mind whose they were. The following night, Peter didn't appear at the usual time. Tom waited until midnight before pouring himself a drink and sitting down alone with the mirror. As he gazed into its depths, he saw something that made him gasp aloud. A vision of Peter Pettigrew, not as a man, but as a giant rat, scurrying through the shadows of the Hogshead. Tom watched in horror as the rat transformed back into human form, revealing itself to be none other than Sirius Black. They argued heatedly, though Tom couldn't make out what they were saying. Then Sirius stormed out, leaving Peter alone with the mirror. Peter looked up at his reflection, a terrible hunger burning in his eyes. He reached out, touching the glass with trembling fingers, and suddenly everything went black. When Tom opened his eyes again, he found himself lying on the floor behind the bar, the mirror shattered beside him. His head throbbed painfully, and there was blood on his hands where he'd cut them on the broken glass. He stumbled out from behind the counter, searching frantically for some sign of Peter or Sirius, but they were gone, leaving only empty glasses and overturned chairs to mark their presence. And there, in the middle of the room, stood a single frame, an exact replica of the one Tom had kept hidden all these years. As he approached it warily, he saw that its surface was no longer clouded but clear as crystal. Within its depths he could see not his own reflection, but a scene playing out like a silent film. A young man with shaggy black hair lay bound and gagged on the floor of a dilapidated shack. His eyes were wide with fear as a figure loomed over him, pointing a wand directly at his heart. Tom recognized that figure instantly. It was Peter Pettigrew, but not as he appeared now. This was Peter as he had been 20 years ago, before he betrayed Sirius to Voldemort. In the vision, Peter hesitated, looking down at his former friend with tears in his eyes. Then, with a trembling hand, he lowered his wand slightly, aiming it instead at Sirius's leg. There was a flash of green light, and Sirius screamed in pain as bone shattered beneath flesh. The scene changed abruptly, showing Sirius being dragged away by two hooded figures, while Peter watched helplessly from the shadows. Then came the trial, the conviction, the sentence, and finally a glimpse of what had happened since. Sirius escaping Azkaban, searching desperately for proof of his innocence. Peter living in fear and shame, hiding behind his animagus form until he could find some way to make amends. Tom watched all this unfold before him, feeling sickened by what he saw. He understood now why Peter had been so eager to share the mirror's power with Sirius. It wasn't greed or curiosity that drove him, but guilt. Guilt for what he'd done 20 years ago, and a desperate desire to set things right. As Tom reached out tentatively to touch the frame, he felt a sudden surge of energy coursing through his veins. The vision shifted again, showing him not just past events but possibilities, branching paths leading off into infinity like roots of a tree. One path showed Sirius dying alone in some grimy corner of London. Another showed him returning triumphant to Hogwarts as a free man. There were countless others, Sirius becoming an Auror, Sirius joining the Order of the Phoenix, Sirius marrying Ginny Weasley or her, Hermione Granger. Each scenario played out differently depending on where Tom directed his thoughts, until finally he focused on one possibility that seemed more likely than the rest, Sirius finding proof of Peter's treachery. And clearing his name, with a deep breath, Tom touched the glass once more. This time, when he opened his eyes, he was standing outside the Hog's Head, watching as a young man with shaggy black hair emerged from the inn, laughing loudly with two friends. It took him a moment to realize that this wasn't Sirius at all but himself, 20 years younger. He had traveled back in time. Overwhelmed by shock and disbelief, Tom stumbled away from the Hog's Head, barely noticing when his younger self called after him, asking if he was all right. He couldn't answer, not yet. There were too many questions racing through his mind, too much uncertainty about what had just happened. But as he walked away, he knew one thing for certain. He had been given a chance to change the course of history, to warn Sirius Black about Peter's betrayal, to save him from 20 years of torment and imprisonment. And so, with purpose burning bright within him like a flame, Tom set off towards Hogwarts, determined to right the wrongs of the past. Meanwhile, back at the Hog's Head, an empty frame stood silently where once there had been a mirror. Behind it, hidden from view, something began to stir. A small spark of light flickered into existence, growing brighter until it coalesced into the form of a tiny bird made entirely of shimmering silver. The bird, for such it appeared to be, despite its peculiar composition, perched atop the frame, regarding it with curious eyes. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, it shot forwards through the glass and disappeared from sight. It would not be seen again until many years later, when one young witch would find herself staring into its reflection, wondering what secrets lay hidden within its depths. But that is another story altogether.